Hi, I'm Simon Mannering, and I'm here at the US Islamic World Forum here in Qatar. And we've been discussing in detail how social media can be used to help weak states or to help resolve lasting social and political issues in countries like Iran, Pakistan, Palestine. And so I had the great privilege of being here with Riyaad Minty, who is the head of social media for Al Jazeera. Now, as we all know, Al Jazeera was incredibly pivotal in communications with regard to Gaza and most recently in Iran. And in fact, Al Jazeera was the only English-speaking reporters on the ground in Gaza. So, Riyaad, thank you for joining me. Now, one of the things that we've discussed this week is the life cycle of social media. How do you make effective change from a government level all the way through down to the NGO level to facilitate cultural understanding, to give the people a voice? Could you talk us through, in your experience, both in Gaza and in Iran, exactly how that works?
Okay, so there's a number of levels that you need to look at when dealing with social media, specifically in terms of crisis. The first is the people on the ground who are affected by a crisis, be it a war, be it an earthquake, whatever the case may be. They need to have the tools to be able to get their message out. So it may be a mobile phone, it may be a computer screen, it may be signing up to Twitter or Facebook, whatever social network that is. You then need the media on top of that to filter through a lot of the information. If you look at Iran, for example, on one day there was 250,000 tweets that came out. And a lot of that was from people outside of Iran, not necessarily from people within Iran. So you need the media to put a lot of that information into context. And then lastly, you need your states or your governments or your NGOs to act upon that information, to listen to the people, to see what sort of information is in, what issues they're having, and how do they deal with that.
So the people themselves have the tools to get the message out there, the media amplifies it, and then the state and the NGOs take action on the strength of that information.
Yeah.
Because as I understand it, as we talked about in the workshop, you may get a huge number of tweets, but in fact, the number of people actually tweeting from inside a country that's going through a crisis may be very small.
Exactly. And Iran is a classic case study of that. A lot of information came out on Twitter, seemingly a lot of information came out on Twitter and YouTube during the post-Iranian elections in June last year. As at Al Jazeera, we were monitoring initially about 45 accounts from the beginning of the war. As the government clamped down and started cutting off communications, that number dropped to about 6 accounts that were able to verify actually being in Iran. And not even in Iran, in Tehran. So the questions that come up, and a lot of media organizations jumped on the bandwagon to say, hey, look, this is what's happening in Iran. The entire Iranian population is revolting against the government. They want to overthrow the regime, which is not necessarily true. Because it's only 6 people out of a population of 65 million, we need to understand who are these people. Most of them are wealthy young students based in Iran. A lot of them realized that international media were looking at them, so you can see the fact that all their banners were in English. So clearly they weren't demonstrating the government, they were demonstrating the international audience to get the attention.
They've got that media savvy. Yeah.
Exactly. And if you were to compare the people in Iran, majority of the people in Iran are poor. They may not speak English, they don't have access to these platforms. So it's not truly representative of the entire society.
It's interesting, there's two dynamics going on here, one of which is social media, while it gives you real-time information, may not be representative of what's actually happening on the ground. And then at the other extreme, there are critical things happening where it's important to raise awareness for them in other countries like the United States, but also you don't want that awareness to be an end in itself. You also need understanding of the larger context so that you don't keep polarizing people and setting people up against each other. You want to bring understanding with that awareness. I mean, how do you balance those two at Al Jazeera?
So, I mean, for us, during the Iran elections, we set up an Iran desk, which was a team of us who specifically monitored the information that was coming out. We tried to go through, and I mean, we had a lot of people discussing the issues. Specifically in Iran, where social media was great, was it showed the government clamped down on protesters. So in reporting the right here, right now, the real-time information, it was fantastic, and had these people not been tweeting, we would have never known what was happening. So the right here and right now, we can deal with it. But then we need to separate the issues. So, okay, we're dealing with the real-time web, and that's all it is. It's not going any levels deeper, it's nothing more than that. We need to then, if you really want to talk about, in Iran again, if the elections were rigged, you then need to actually go out to get voices from people across the entire country to get popular sentiment. As a media organization in Iran, it was pretty tough because there was a clampdown on media.
You know, ultimately our hope, I guess, my hope, and as I understand it this week, most people's hope is that new media can be engaged, or social media can be engaged in the service of fostering understanding, compassion, tolerance, and an exchange between cultures, rather than an imposition of change from a culture that's outside. Why do you think that distinction is important?
Traditionally, I mean, a lot of the discussions that were happening here at the forum was always about change. I mean, you could take that from Barack Obama's campaign. It was all about change. And change is good, but when we're dealing, at least in social media and the online space, cultural exchange is a lot more important. We don't need to, we can't think about change until you understand the other viewpoint. So it's important for us to maybe take a step back and first have that engagement phase before we start talking about change. You know, let's see where each party is coming from the Muslim world, from across the Western world. What makes you tick? What gets you up in the morning? What's your biggest challenge? I mean, it's one of the things we discussed was during the South African elections. It's a classic example. They said that we have one South Africa tweeting and one South Africa not eating.
Exactly.
And so people have different challenges, and until we can start understanding what those challenges are, we really can't talk about change.
No, and it is a luxury of the more privileged in a lot of cultures, as you say, like South Africa and like in Iran. And one of the concerns I have is that as social media becomes more ubiquitous around the world, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that the role of people communicating with each other needs to be listening first, as you say, rather than talking about themselves. In the United States, you know, I always champion that brands will be distinguished in the future by the quality of their listening to their consumer audience, but it also applies between people in different regions around the world. Would you agree? Or?
Definitely. I mean, listening is the first part of talking.
Right.
And if you're not listening, really, whatever you're saying really doesn't have much substance before it. And I think right now in the world, we need to listen to each other. We all need to take a step back and try to understand each other, and then we can start talking about it.
Your hopes, you know, in this pivotal role that you're in Al Jazeera, what are your hopes that, you know, for social media moving forward in the region in the next year?
Well, I mean, we focus on 3 areas. One of them is what we call distribution, where we try to put our content online, so available on our YouTube channel. Anyone can watch it, take it, blog about it, and share it, and get discussions.
So it's kind of Creative Commons, just open out?
So Creative Commons is one part where we put the Creative Commons license, and all of our broadcast footage in our programs are online from both Arabic and English channels. Right. And that's a very different model from other news organizations who are all talking about paywalls. When you start charging for content, we believe everyone has the right to news, not just if you can afford it. So we put in all of our content online for free. The second is interactivity, so people can start interacting directly with our shows. They can start asking questions directly to people in power. So for example, one of our talk shows, the Rizkan show, he has very prominent guests that come on his show, from Hillary Clinton to Rania of Jordan. And he takes questions from Twitter, Facebook, text message, and he asks it directly to the people speaking power.
Right.
So we kind of setting
so that direct dialogue.
That direct, exactly. Right. So it's basically enabling people with the tools to hold people in power accountable for the actions. And the last one is community. How can we, the different pockets of communities around the world, how can we get them discussing issues, how can we get them debating issues that are important, specifically around Al Jazeera content, so we can sit in the middle and facilitate these discussions.
Right. Well, I mean, I've personally found it a very exciting week and a week of great sort of insight and inspiration. So many people have their hearts in the right place, whether they're, you know, from different religions or different regions around the world. I mean, do you think social media can play a big part in facilitating understanding in the region?
Definitely. As long as we get the relevant voices online and we listen to people. If you want to go back to the Gaza, the discussions that happen online were more about people venting and activists really complaining. Right. And there was very little discussion that was happening for people to try and understand both sides of the view.
And that's interesting because, like any conversation, people may vent at first, but then they need to actually engage with each other and get to know each other better and see the other point of view.
Yeah.
Right.
And so moving forward, social media is a platform. It's the tools. It's there. It exists. It's a medium. It's people traditionally sit in a coffee shop and sit and talk about politics. Why can't we do it online? And you are spend most of our time online as the youth. I'm always connected, and I know most people around the world are connected. So why can't we do the same in an online environment?
Fantastic. Well, you know, you're doing really, really important work and making information and content available to us that we otherwise wouldn't have. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thanks.